how big an achievement is it for them to get into the Champions League?
I think it's incredible, especially when you put into perspective that 18 months ago Newcastle were bottom of the Premier League. I think that speaks to the job that Eddie Howe did. First of all, recruiting in a January that Newcastle bottom of the table in is not easy to bring talent in when, yes, you're joining a Premier League club, but at the time they were odds-on favourites to go down into the Championship. But Eddie Howe was able to do that. I also think that Kieran Trippier was a big factor in that, because he, if memory serves me correctly, was the first really notable signing of that January transfer window, and him showing faith, the faith in the project, I think played a big part in other players such as Bruno Guimaraes coming in that same January. But for Newcastle to be back in the Champions League, to have that platform, not just in terms of bringing European football back to St. James's Park, but to continue in recruiting talent, like top talent to the football club. I think the effects of finishing top four is going to go far beyond whatever this Champions League run may have in store. It speaks to who Newcastle is a club, and their ambitions and the targets that are achievable.
For so long, what will it mean to them?
It'll mean everything. And listen, I don't mean to downplay how much it will mean to Newcastle United fans, but this is a fan base that would still sell out St. James's Park in the Championship. A lot is made of the war flags displays that you see at St. James's Park week in, week out. That started when Newcastle won the Championship. And again, so it speaks to a fan base and a loyalty in that football club that I'm not sure many other fan bases can claim. I'm not sure that many outside observers even recognize. So this is really the icing on the cake in so many ways for Newcastle United and that fan base, when the cake had been baked a long time ago by fans who'd endured a Mike Ashley ownership that lacked any kind of motivation about the style of football, about how good the club can and should be. This is a fan base that kind of kept some of their own dreams alive despite all of that. So to see it rewarded, I think for the fans in particular, I think it's heartwarming, and it's a great story for football to continue to tell. But in telling that story, I think you have to tell the whole story as to how this fan base just remained loyal and kept this club I say afloat, not meaning financially, but certainly in terms of who they are as a spectacle and as a club that players would want to join. Yeah, I'm nothing's going to come to mind specifically. I guess the first thing that comes to mind and is the 3-3 draw with Manchester City, and the fact that Newcastle were 3-up. And while it finished on a draw, and of course that was disappointing, I think it spoke to how good Newcastle could be, how good they were at their best. And again, listeners, as much as you only take a point from it, and I think you look back on that a little bit disappointingly, being 3-up to only take a point. I think certainly that first half, I'm trying to remember exactly what the scoreline was at halftime, but that first half performance was encouraging in ways that a point against Manchester City shouldn't normally be.
No, for fortunes around to get them to where they are now.
Incredible is the only word I can use, and I have to admit I was a little bit skeptical of the Eddie Howe signing. You know, I think I'm right in saying that he didn't seem to be the club's first choice. I wondered if he was the man to take charge of what was going to be a tough relegation scrap, just given his previous experiences with Bournemouth, and the ambitions of the club. I just felt, you know, they're and maybe this is more my fault. A lot of speculation around big name managers kind of give him the new ownership and the money that, or certainly the wealth that they brought to the table, which I'll speak further on. So I had my apprehensions, and again, you know, you go into that January transfer window rock bottom. That's not easy to do. To sign players and under those conditions is not easy to do. And I just spoke about the players coming in and how important that was. You survive, great. I don't mean to underplay that, but Newcastle survives. In a manner that I don't think anybody expected. But similarly, I don't think anybody expected the kind of season that they had this time around. And again, just kind of given the money that the ownership group have, and there was a lot of speculation about, you know, Mbappe's and Lionel Messi's, and everything about the club was different to that. It was about building from within. It was about making sure that it's a team. And a team that represented the city and fan base well. So there were none of those big name signings that a lot of people speculated on. And Eddie Howe built a team. You know, Isaac, again, I didn't think he was worth the money that they paid for him. I thought he's an incredible player that can play as an out and out striker, or one of a two or three, as I've seen him do in Spain. But I didn't think it was worth that money, and he was that and a whole lot more during the course of this season. And I think that all that comes down to Eddie Howe, or all that. Well, yes, we can share lots of praise around, and rightly so. Eddie Howe is central to all of that praise, from the signings in January to how he managed the transfer window last summer, to how he got the best out of Isaac and Guimaraes and Callum Wilson despite his own injuries, to how good the team was defensively. All those things, all those praises you sing for Newcastle United, Eddie Howe was central to.
Any top club would want.
Yeah, again, you're talking about a Premier League club that has money, ownership group that has money and could spend to fix any problems. But you move you move Joe Linton from striker to a defensive midfielder alongside Bruno Guimaraes, and he's one of the standout players of the season, and maybe in certain respects one of the unsung heroes. And I say that knowing full well how much praise he's gotten, and it's probably not anywhere near as much as it should be. He really has been that good. But you mentioned Wilson, you mentioned Murphy. I mean, those players and the roles that they perform for Newcastle, I think exceeded every single expectation. And it speaks to, I think, an attention to detail. And I say that from a position of some knowledge, in that I was at Newcastle during the preseason. I was over there this summer. Newcastle just started their preseason training, and Eddie kindly invited me to come along and watch training, and I did. And it was it preseason, or maybe it was the end of last season, whichever way. The attention to detail that Eddie showed, even on the training ground, well, it was I freely admit I retired some 15 years ago, but it was unlike anything I'd seen. So to see him get the best out of players as he did, I think it's more about just kind of recognizing some of those cues from that we don't see on a Saturday, that you only pick up in working day in, day out with a player on the training ground. Again, so much of Newcastle's successes, Eddie Howe has been central to.
Something.
Yeah. listen, I was it was the back end of last season. I was there for the Arsenal game, so I was at the training ground just before what was the last home game of last season of 2022, and so at the time there were a couple of staff who were there when I was playing. Derek Wright, who's now retired, the kit man, Alan Thompson, or Alan Tomo, I can't remember Tomo's first name. No, Wright was the physio, Tomo was the kit man, and Steve Harper is the director of the academy, who I played with Steve at Newcastle and remained in touch through the years. And everybody was saying there that despite the wealth of the ownership group, they weren't going to be spending ridiculous money on players. They were going to build slowly and be strategic about how they brought players in and the money that they spent. So I was not surprised by the lack of big name signing in the summer transfer window, because that was the feeling around the club. Everybody at the club felt that this would be their approach. So I wasn't surprised by it. I have to admit, though, I was very surprised by the players that came in, exactly how good they were and how well they fitted into what Eddie Howe was doing. I think they'll need to add to the squad at the very least for squad depth, because all of a sudden now you're playing 2 games a week. Obviously, there's some exceptions to that, but your squad will be stretched like never before. So there need to be additional numbers. I don't expect big money, big name signings that some may. There may be the odd signing, but I think the approach of what's best for the squad as a whole will again dominate Newcastle's approach. What's best long term. This is not about competing with Manchester City or PSG or the likes. This is it's not about competing with them in the short term. This is about building a squad, building a culture around the football club that will see Newcastle United compete with those clubs on the longer term. Absolutely. Listen, I thought everything about Todd Bowley's and about his acquisition and his approach since his acquisition has been erratic and didn't make any kind of football sense. Listen, I understand the circumstances around Chelsea becoming available for purchase for starters. But from there, I'm really not. I couldn't make any sense of Bowley's approach, whether it was around signings, whether it was around the undermining of Thomas Tuchel. Given the fact that Thomas Tuchel, how we managed the club through that transition from Abramovich to Bowley and his investment group, and then the quick turnaround in hiring Graham Potter, and then the signings. The money spent, the length of contracts that he put players on, the number of players that they signed made absolutely no footballing sense. And I think Chelsea, and again, in contrast to Newcastle, I think those are decisions that will affect that club in the long term, that will go well beyond this season, whether Chelsea qualify, whether Chelsea finish top 4 this season or not. I think the effects of that will continue to rumble on. So again, that example probably makes you appreciate Newcastle's approach all the more.
What he's going to be
like. I think Pochettino will have an impact. I think I really like Mauricio Pochettino as a coach, and I think he did a wonderful job at Spurs. Again, I thought he was undermined certainly in that final season. Listen, things weren't going great, but I couldn't understand the kind of hair-triggered nature to his departure, given his successes and given some of the challenges of managing Tottenham Hotspur. But I think he brings that same approach to Chelsea. He starts to address those issues. The trouble is right now, I think Chelsea has a lot of issues that need addressing, while there are other clubs that don't. You know, you could Chelsea has to trim their squad at a time where they are motivated sellers, and anybody who's interested in players knows that they have to sell. So it makes it all the more difficult, or all the more costly, even in getting rid of players. Then you have to figure out who fits where. You still need to sign a striker. Strikers are the hottest commodity this summer. There are a lot of problems for Chelsea, where Man City, you know, are just going to continue being Man City. Right now, you think Arsenal will continue as they have shown this season. They'll be good again. You expect Manchester United to be even better and continue to grow under Erik ten Hag. I feel exactly the same about Newcastle United. You think Liverpool cannot be as bad as they were, and despite finishing fifth this season, but they're going to be improved. So all of a sudden, you have 5 or 6 clubs vying for a top 4 spot, realistic ambitions for a top 4 spot. Chelsea playing catch up on all of those, and of all those 6 clubs, they're the ones who can least afford to miss out. So, you know, it becomes a real challenge for Chelsea and Pochettino.